This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hi guys, I'm here with the second half of the Bakugou grenade gauntlet video. So to start off, before we get to painting, I'm adding some last minute details, which is battle damage, and I'm taking my Dremel and kind of just scratching at the foam. I kind of wanted to create, I don't know exactly how to explain what I was going for, but like explosion looking marks, if that makes any sense. So it's not just like a couple single scratches here or there, it's more of a bunch of like a cluster of scratch looking marks in certain areas, as well as a couple single scratches here or there on some of the squares. But around like the hand and the front or top of the gauntlet, I created these little clustered group of scratches. When I was happy with the battle damage, I coated everything in a couple layers of Plasti Dip until it was like fully coated, and then went ahead and applied Bondo's Glazing and Spot Putty to any of the seams that were still showing, so like this top part and the underside of the trigger piece, and then a couple of the seam lines around the top and bottom. Let that dry, and then sanded that down, and then applied another layer of Plasti Dip. Since the primer or Plasti Dip that I used was already black, and that middle section, like the base layer where the green squares are, is supposed to be black, I decided that rather than having to paint it again, or paint it black again, I would just seal it off using painter's tape. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm applying painter's tape all around the edge as close to the silver edging as possible, because to get the silver color, I'll be using silver spray paint. And, you know, if you don't cover something that just goes everywhere, you can't be as precise with that as you can with acrylic paint or something. When I've finished lining all of the edges with this painter's tape, I go ahead and take some scrap pieces of fabric that I have, not fabric, paper, scrap pieces of paper that I have, and cover the rest of the gauntlet that's not supposed to be silver in this. And I make sure that this is fully sealed off by taping down all of the edges. And you want to make sure you do this, because if there's an edge that's left open, the spray paint still might get up and under that, and then you'll have to repaint it later, which is what I'm trying to avoid. Once I've painted on a couple layers of silver spray paint and removed the protective paper and painter's tape, I start painting on the green color, and for this I'm using acrylic paint. I start off by painting the tops of every square, and I think I do about 3 to 4 coats of this before it's fully covered and opaque. once the tops are fully covered, I start painting the edges, all the sides of these squares super carefully because I didn't want to get any of the green on the black. Although if you do, it's not too big of a deal because you can just paint over it with black or scratch it off. I again do about 3 to 4 layers, and this took a really long time because there's a lot of edges and I had to use a fairly small brush and paint a bit slower to make sure that the green wasn't getting anywhere else and getting the edges fully covered. After the green is all painted on, I coat it with a layer or 2 of clear glossy spray paint, and then I move on to shading. And I'm shading and adding grunge using black oil paint. And I use a mix of brushes and paper towels, I think is what I use, to kind of smudge it out and add some texture. So I'm going to explain a bit more what I'm doing. So in all of the cuts and grooves that I created, like the battle damage, I make sure that that is the darkest and apply quite a bit of black oil paint there and don't smudge it out as much. But I felt like it still looked too clean, so I kind of spread out that oil paint, especially in those areas, a bit more and use a rougher brush that I had, something that's not as smooth and a little bit more like stipply, if that makes any sense, to kind of like spread it out and mess it up and have it have some like harsher dotted texture to it. And then a softer brush beneath that though, like beneath that layer of paint that I do, I kind of like smudge it out and blend it out and just darken an area in general, very like lightly, if any of this makes sense, using a fluffy brush, and then I use like the stipple brush or whatever it's called on top of that. And then I kind of take a really even smaller brush and just dab on some almost clumps of oil paint, but not a clump, like it's really small dots, just to have, again, more texture to it and a darker patch, since everything else is kind of like blended and softened out. I wanted something that looked just darker in general. And basically just play around with your paint until you get something that looks like how you want it to look, and add grunge anywhere that you think feels too clean or feels like this is where you want it. I added a lot around where the arm goes, especially in the front and around any cuts. And I also shaded around all of the sides and the entire edge of the top of all the green squares, which unfortunately I thought I got footage of, but I can't find it if I did. So if you look at a photo, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I do have a very short clip from my phone adding some grunge to the green parts, but I'd use the same technique that I used on the silver for this. I'm also shading around any part that's raised where, you know, a shadow would fall, just to add, again, more depth to everything. So one thing that I liked that I did was add these streaks to a lot of areas. I did this also on some of the green parts, which I'll have a clip of here in a moment. But what I did to do this was add a small thin streak of oil paint, but it's like a very thick streak of it, and then drag that out with a fluffier brush that's a flat brush though, so that it doesn't blend too much, and just kind of streak that along in a pattern that looks like there was an explosion or something that happened. That's the look that I was going for, so hopefully it makes sense. I liked how it made it look. Here's the clip that I'm talking about where I added some streaks to the green part of the gauntlet, and you can see some of the shadowing around the edge. Once I was happy with how the oil paint was looking and how everything was grunged up, I went ahead and coated that in a glossy clear spray paint, and that would finish it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it helpful, and stuck around for more videos of other characters as well as a few more Bakugou related ones. Bye!